beginning in verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of the band called the Italian, a devout man and one that feared God with all his house, which gave much alms to the people and prayed to God always. He saw in a vision, evidently about the 9th hour of the day, an angel of God coming into him and saying unto him, Cornelius. And when he looked on him, he was afraid and said, What is it, Lord? And he said unto him, Thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa, and call for one Simon, whose surname is Peter. He lodgeth with one Simon a tanner, whose house is by the sea, and he shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius was departed, he called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. And when he had declared all these things unto him, he sent them to Joppa. And on the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very hungry, and would have eaten, but while they had made ready, he fell into a trance. And he saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten of anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the 2nd time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven.
Okay, I'm going to pick up, instead of reading that whole portion, I'm just going to pick up in verse 9. And on the next day, as they were on their way and approaching the city, Kepha went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, and he became hungry and wished to eat. But while they were preparing, he fell into a trance. And he saw the heaven opened, and a certain vessel like a great sheet, bound at the 4 corners, descending to him, and let down to the earth, in which were all kinds of 4-footed beasts of the earth, wild beasts, creeping creatures, and the birds of the heaven. And a voice came to him, Rise up, Kepha, slay and eat. But Kepha said, Not at all, master, because I have never eaten whatever is common or unclean. And a voice came to him again the 2nd time, What Elohim has cleansed, you do not consider common. And this took place 3 times, and the vessel was taken back to the heaven. So this is a controversial portion of Scripture as far as we're concerned, because it seems to fly in the face of what we believe.
Right. It appears that way.
Yeah, many interpret this this experience that Kepha, that Peter had, by adding to what Peter says and subtracting from what Peter says. And many interpret it, as I did for years, that this was the voice of Yahweh that was speaking to Peter to reject the Torah and the dietary regulations in the Torah as given previously through the first 5 books of Moshe. And now there's a new deal. Now you can go ahead and eat pork, you can go ahead and eat shellfish, you can go ahead and eat lobster, you can go ahead and eat what we would refer to now as top feeders and bottom feeders.
Right.
And that's the question, is that what it says, or is that what is being implied here? And by the wording, many people get tripped up right here, because they do believe that this is the voice of Yahweh. They would call him God by a title and not his name. And that he is telling Peter here to go ahead and eat anything and everything. That's done with a couple of assumptions.
Right.
One assumption is that all kinds, in verse 12, of 4-footed beasts of the earth, wild beasts, and creeping, and the birds of the heaven were all unclean. That according to Torah, they are saying that, see, right here, Yahweh is telling Kepha to go ahead and eat unclean beasts. Kepha's response then, as a Torah-observant Jew, is one that is, pretty standard for that particular, scenario and situation, in that he's saying, no, I always have lived according to what your dietary regulations have dictated from the Torah, and now you're telling me that I'm supposed to go ahead and eat these things. I'm not going to do it. Well, then the 3 times that this is given to Peter in this trance, in this vision, seems to substantiate that. However, there's a different slant that we have to consider based on 2 things here that take place. One is what Peter later says, and what Peter currently is doing.
Right.
For example, in verse 17, which we didn't read, we see that Kepha was doubting within himself about what the vision might mean. And then while he's doubting himself about this vision, these 3 men approach.
Right.
So if he knew clearly right then that that was the voice of Yahweh telling him to go ahead and reject the Torah, the dietary regulations that have been given, and that now is a new deal and you can go ahead and eat, why would he be wondering, why would he be doubting within himself what this vision means? And so that's where I believe people put words in Peter's mouth.
Right.
They interpret him doing that in verse 17 as Peter saying, or the commentary about Peter's experience as saying, I know exactly what the vision said, what the voice said. There's no reason for me to doubt. There's no reason for me to question. I can go ahead and eat anything that I want.
Wow. Yeah. And that can't be because, I mean, again, context dictates the story. The story is, it's based upon what we begin reading here in the beginning of the chapter, that it's connected with Cornelius, a Gentile, and being instructed by Yahweh to send for Peter. So the context is those 2 people groups in reality.
The context sets that, and we have to abide by that. So because of what this scenario is illustrating, you're right. That first portion of the chapter is establishing that Yahweh is doing something different that he has spoken a long time ago that he would do.
Right.
That he actually had spoken through his prophets that he was going to include the Gentiles in his overall plan. For example, in Isaiah 56, starting in verse 1, thus said Yahweh, guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the son of man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath, lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the son of a foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from his people, nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dry tree, I cannot bear fruit. For thus said Yahweh in verse 4, to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbaths, and have chosen what pleases me, and are holding on to my covenant, to them I shall give in my house, literally in my family, and within my walls, a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant, them I shall bring to my set-apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings, their sacrifices are accepted on my slaughter place, for my house, my family, is called a family or a house of prayer for all peoples.
I mean, so in this scenario that we're reading about, this historical document that tells what happened to Peter, what Peter wasn't understanding was this that you just read in Isaiah 56, because the mindset at that time among those of Judaism was that that was something that couldn't be. Yeah. And so what he's doing is he's in effect saying, Peter, you're right. Yeah, this that I've offered you that is not food, you're right.
In not eating it.
In not eating it. But now take that kind of belief to all of the Scripture, all of the Word that's been given. Just as that is true, this is as well. You have a wrong perspective here.
That's right, and that's exactly what's taking place. He's saying, good for you, Kepha, good for you, Peter. I have come to you 3 times, and you're holding to what is written,
Amen,
even stronger than what you're hearing.
Amen.
Now, that's a very important aspect, because Yahweh and His Word will not be done, or Yahweh's Word will not be, and the Torah, or what is referred to as the law and the prophets, will not be done away with to the degree that it's being applied today until heaven and earth are done away with. So His Word does not change because He does not change. So there's the test. A voice comes to a person, a voice comes to you, or a voice comes to one of the listeners, and tells that person to contradict what is written in the Scriptures. Now that person is in a tight spot. They're in a situation where they have to make a decision. Do I trust an experience that I can't even qualify because I want to live by the word of Yahweh, or do I rely on what is written? And here I think Kepha proves, even though, he's done some, what I would consider some flaky things and said some flaky things.
Like we all do.
Like we all do prior to this. And it is interesting that Yahweh in His faithfulness, how many times did Kepha deny Yeshua?
3 times.
Isn't it interesting that there are 3 times here that it's like he's confirmed? Even in the last chapter of the Good News, according to the version written by John, Yeshua confronts Kepha 3 times.
Right.
There's always that necessity when a person is, I believe, in a very, very desperate place. Yahweh always provides 3 witnesses. So Kepha was a false witness 3 times. He now is a true witness 3 times to the truth of the word of Yahweh, and he's tenaciously holding on to what is written in spite of what he experienced in this trance or in this vision or in this supernatural occurrence where this voice and this vessel, I looked at that word sheet, that's in the King James and also used in these scriptures in verse 11, were a great sheet. And that word, even in the Greek, is actually a transliteration from a Hebrew word, keli, K-E-L-E-E, which means any kind of vessel or any kind of container that would be able to hold certain things.
Right.
And so it's just simply a vessel. It's not, something to spiritualize with some sheet. And I've heard all kinds of nonsense over the years about the application of this. But it's a vessel. And in that vessel, we're probably clean and unclean concerning what is identified in the Torah as to something to eat or not to eat.
Right.
And so Kepha, in his tenaciousness, he holds to what is written. And if he would have come to the absolute conclusion right then that it was all about food, verse 17 wouldn't have even been written that he was...
Exactly. He would have done like we've heard some Bible teachers on the radio have said that he did. He went right downstairs and made himself a ham sandwich.
Yeah.
It's the most ridiculous statement in the world, but people latch right onto that, and I believe it's because of, just to be blunt, it's the rebellion in our heart that will latch on to those kinds of things because we don't want to obey.
Well, it started in the garden, didn't it?
Amen.
I mean, it was one command, do not eat of that tree. We couldn't even handle it as mankind with one command.
Right.
And so now it's because of the variation of sin that has, exponentially multiplied and morphed into all of these different expressions of it. We've got, in like manner, the same application of the increase of the laws or of the commands of Yah. And so, so here we see him holding on to what is written and proving himself to be a person of what is written. And that's why the voice says, in the same way, I want you to consider beyond,
right,
and look at what you're doing here. You have actually fallen in with these Judaizers, I'll refer to them as. They are people of that time that were taking the instruction of Yahweh and adding to it, as we've said before, and or subtracting from it, and they came up with their own version of it. Christianity has done the same thing today.
Right.
A lot of Christians carry his law around in their scriptures, in their Bibles, and they study their Bibles, and they go to Bible studies, and they go to places where sermons are preached supposedly out of the scriptures, but they don't embrace what is being written in those scriptures. They don't realize the entirety of it is still applicable.
Exactly. And when we read this, we read the story of what happened, when Kepha was in this trance, in this state, that this happened. We read that, and then the whole rest of the chapter, we don't read about that again. It doesn't talk about that again, and we don't hear this. We only hear this story recounted one more time, and it's in the next chapter. Mm-hmm. And in the next chapter, Kepha relates it to them and then tells them what it was really all about.
Yeah. So when we see in this chapter, before we jump to that one, the goal here is Yahweh fulfilling what one of the prophets that I read from in Isaiah 56 prophesied, that he was going to include all the nations. Cornelius here is what the Old Testament scriptures, or the Hebrew scriptures, would be referred to as one who was not disdaining the law of Yahweh. He was not born in Israel as a true Israelite, but he respected the Elohim of Israel, and he respected their commands given to them, and he was actually someone who was leaning very much toward that, though he wouldn't be included because he was a Gentile in their inner circles.
Well, I mean, the testimony that we get in verse 2 of chapter 10 here, dedicated, speaking of Cornelius, dedicated and fearing Elohim with all his household, doing many kind deeds to the people and praying to Elohim always.
Yeah, and called a righteous man. So when Kepha goes with these three guys, let's pick it up there in verse 17, and let's read on down through, and I'll tell you, I'll read it this time since you read so much last time, and people will get the idea we're using both scriptures, I hope.
Okay.
Verse 17, while Kepha was doubting within himself about what the vision might mean, look, the men who have been sent from Cornelius, having asked for the house of Shimon, stood at the gate, and calling out, they inquired whether Shimon, also known as Kepha, was staying there. And Kepha was thinking about the vision. The Spirit says to him, see, 3 men seek you. There's that 3 again. 3 witnesses again that sometimes I guess Kepha really needs. He doesn't. One witness isn't enough for him. So Kepha went down to the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, look, I am the one you seek. Why have you come? And they said, Cornelius, the captain, a righteous man and one who fears Elohim. And what I was going to say is this person would be referred to as a Elohim fearer in the Hebrew scriptures. He was not someone who rejected, disdained, or despised Yahweh Elohim. And it was spoken of, well spoken of by the entire nation of the Yahudim. Even the Jews spoke highly of him. Was instructed by a set-apart messenger. Now, there's a difference between set-apart messengers and fallen messengers.
Exactly.
The difference between those angels, your scriptures might say, that are holy, which is a bad word to use for in reference to set apart, and then those fallen angels that followed Lucifer. This was one that was set apart, hadn't fallen, to send for you to his house and to hear words from you. So inviting them in, he housed them. Kepha houses them, which is unheard of, by the way. These are Gentiles according to the laws of the Yahudim, not according to Yahweh's laws and his instruction, but according to the laws of the Yahudim. That was something you better not do.
And that's an important point, and maybe just to stop for a second and emphasize, is that there were 2 laws in existence at that time, probably more, but there were essentially 2, just as there is now. There's the truth of what is written in the Scripture, the commandments, the instructions called Torah.
Not added to, not subtracted from.
Exactly what is written. And then there's man's version that adds to and subtracts from. And so that's what Shaul, when we read in his letters, came to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Yeshua was dealing with when he said, you've heard it said, but I say to you.
That's right. You've heard the instruction on what was said originally. They've gotten off, so I'm going to right the ship here.
Exactly.
I'm going to put it back in focus for you. And that's exactly what we're attempting to do in this this feeble effort that we're doing here. So he invites them in, and on the next day, Kepha went away with them, and some brothers from Yepho went with them. And the following day they entered into Caesarea. And Cornelius was waiting for them, having called together his relatives and close friends. And it came to be that when Kepha entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and bowed before him. But Kepha raised him up, saying, "Stand up, I myself am also a man." In other words, according to the Torah, according to the Scriptures, you look at the commandments in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, you see the 10 commandments there. One of them is not to bow down to or worship any other Elohim, other than the one that has been characterized, that has been clearly detailed in a description of who he is and who he isn't.
Amen.
And so, Kepha raised him up, and talking with him, he went in and found many who had come together. And he said to them, "You know that a Yehudi man is not allowed to associate with or go to one of another race." Now, where do we find that in the Torah, in the instruction of Yahweh?
We don't.
So what he's saying here is, that's what you've heard, that's what has been established, but notice what he says next verse. "But Elohim has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean."
So he's getting the meaning of the vision that he had. Now he's telling us.
He's now giving his interpretation of what he experienced. This is where we, as traditionalists, went into error. We decided not to believe what Peter said about his vision, his trance, his experience. We decided that we would reinvent what he was saying. We decided, instead of what Peter says here, that it wasn't in pertaining to eating unclean stuff now. It was calling people unclean that Yahweh has not called unclean.
Yeah, back in verse 15, what Elohim has cleansed, you do not consider common.
Yeah.
So you have to tie those two verses together in context.
The context of verse 15 and verse 28 is very, very important. And so he says, that is why I came without hesitation. In other words, even though the Yehudi, the Jews of that time, they would reject me. Kepha is saying they would reject me for doing this, but Yahweh has shown me that they call you folks unclean because you're not Jews. And Yahweh doesn't call you folks unclean. It has nothing to do with, that which is detailed and described in the Scriptures. Yahweh calls certain things that people eat unclean.
Right. He says it's not food.
It's not food. Yeah, that whole phrase, unclean food, I don't know what that's all about, because all food is clean in and of itself. But things that people have made food, Yahweh has called unclean. That of, pork, it's an abomination, swine, that of those that are under the sea, that are the bottom feeders. The reason we would refer to those as top feeders and bottom feeders, when Yahweh created all that he created, he said it was good.
Amen.
We're the ones that add the two words for food.
Right.
He didn't say that. He didn't say that pork was good for food. What pork is good for, I had recently read an article that New Jersey and a couple of other places have wised up to using pork for what they are created for, and that would be to destroy and eat up the trash and the garbage that is unclean.
They'll eat anything.
They'll eat anything. The problem is these people are so wacky, they go ahead and eat the pork after they've ate all their garbage.
Yeah, it's like trying to eat an oil filter.
It's crazy, or worse.
Yeah.
And so those that are bottom feeders, that would be without fins, without scales, that are in the water, they're cleaning up the water. Just like the pigs were created to clean up the top, the land, that which is created by Yah, and he said was good to clean up the water from all the waste and all the pollution, all the dirt and the grime and all of that stuff of everything that's living there. So, yeah, they were good, but like I said earlier, we're the ones that keep adding to his word the two words for food.
The science, biology, has known for a long time that eating those kinds of things have detrimental effects on your health.
Yeah.
And that's important to know. But the reality, the bottom line of why not to eat it, goes specifically to Yahweh said, do not eat this. This is not food.
Yeah, it's a matter of obedience.
Amen.
The benefits of obedience can result in health.
That's what Deuteronomy 28 teaches us.
I've been standing at the meat counter in different stores over the years, and just kind of noticing what people order and what people buy. And I'm telling you, Banner, I can't tell you how many times I've been standing at a meat counter and I'm ordering, sliced beef or sliced turkey or chicken or something. And, I hear somebody order 5 or 6 different kinds of pork, and I turn around and look at them. They look like they're on death's door.
I know.
And they don't even realize it. I mean, they've got parlor skin color. They've got no life in their eyes. They, a lot of times are grossly obese. You can just see them. They're just kind of existing. And yet they are so persistent on disobeying Yahweh and reaping the lack of benefit.
Yeah, it's their right. They have freedom to do that, they believe. A personal testimony in that. I used to be a big pork eater, I mean, you used to have bags of pork skins around.
It was gross, man.
Yeah, and I believed what Yah said and quit eating that, and over time, by continuing to look into Scripture about what he says is food and how to eat, which it gets more involved if you are willing to dig in deeper. And I've lost 100 pounds.
Yeah.
That's a testimony to what his word says. But when I quit eating it, it wasn't because of the health issue, because I wasn't even really aware of that to that degree at that point. It was just because he said so.
That's right. And that has to be the main reason, out of obedience, out of submission to him as the creator of the universe. So then Kepha goes on in verse 29, that is why I came without hesitation. And so he asked him, why have you sent for me? Cornelius says in verse 30, 4 days ago, I was fasting until this hour. And at the 9th hour I prayed in my house, and see, a man stood before me in shining garments and said, Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your kind deeds were remembered before Elohim. And so he tells me to send for you, and you come. And so now he says in verse 33, I sent to you immediately, and you have done well to come. And now we are all present before Elohim to hear all that you have been commanded by Elohim. And opening his mouth, Kepha said, truly, I see that Elohim shows no partiality, but in every nation he who fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. It's exactly what I read from in Isaiah 56.
Exactly.